guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albertson. This was actually my Patreon book pick for the month of September, so every month my Patreon supporters get to vote in a poll for which book I will read and review that month. So if you're interested in contributing to my channel in that way and being a part of some of the decision making, I will leave my Patreon linked on the screen. So The Hazel Wood I originally thought was a standalone, but looks like it may be part of a series because on Goodreads it has The Hazel Wood #1, so it might be a series, but I haven't heard more about it. So right now I kind of view it as a standalone, but maybe it's not. And it follows 17-year-old Alice, and all her life, her and her mother have been running away from bad luck. Every time they move somewhere, something weird happens to them and they end up having to leave very suddenly. And her grandmother, her mother's mother, is this famous writer who wrote these really dark fairy tales and has kind of been secluded away, died many years ago on her estate called the Hazel Wood. And Alice really knows nothing about her. But one day her mother ends up going missing, and it is connected to her grandmother and these dark fairy tales, so Alice has to kind of track down what this all means. These books have been missing for some time, her grandmother's fairy tales, and they're really hard to track down, so she doesn't really know even the stories in them. So she ends up having to track down people who know the stories in order to figure out what's going on and to track down her mother. So first off, let me just say that this is a very polarizing book. I didn't realize how polarizing it was. I remember when it first came out that I was hearing kind of some negative reviews about it, which made me not want to pick it up as quickly as I thought I was going to, but after I read it, I was also seeing a lot of like really conflicting reviews, and people either just tend to love or hate this book. So watching this review, just be aware of that it's one of those books that I don't know if I can like universally recommend or anything, like just, I don't know. It's one of those weird books that falls in that gray area where people are either going to just like absolutely adore everything about it just based on like emotion and feeling, or are going to absolutely hate it based on the same kind of things. So let's get into it. So first off, I'm going to talk about the world building. This is all based around these weird, creepy fairy tales that Alice's grandmother wrote, and they are not your typical fairy tales. They follow some typical fairy tale rules, but like not really. The whole point of these stories is that they don't really tell or show a message the way that typical fairy tales do. Like they're dark, they're creepy, they're gory, they're like more than the Grimm fairy tales, because the Grimm fairy tales ultimately have like a point. Like these are just obscure and random and don't really follow a set of rules, and that gives this story just an eeriness to it, because there are these stories, as she discovers more about this book and her grandmother's tales, the stories are woven into it, and like your brain sits there and is like, this is gonna have, like it's gonna go this direction, because fairy tales typically do. Like fairy tales have a formula. These don't, and that eeriness I found really compelling. I will say I also really enjoyed Melissa Albertson's writing style, but I think that's another thing that makes people kind of maybe not like it so much. I wouldn't necessarily call it like purple prose the way that like Laini Taylor's and stuff is, but still kind of within that vein where either you're really gonna like it and you're really gonna like the descriptions and everything, or you're really not going to like it. So there's definitely a lot of pointing out certain fairy tales we don't even really get to fully explore, and I think that might even be like jarring to some people, but I just really enjoyed how atmospheric this was and how like eerie but not scary, just like unsettling this was. Next, let me talk about the characters. So Alice as a main character seems to be very polarizing as well. She's kind of an unlikable protagonist, so she definitely is like a grumpier protagonist, very kind of spontaneous, and one of the things that she recognizes as a fault of her own and something her and her mother worked on for a long time was her anger. So she's an angry, stubborn protagonist that is unlikable. My favorite kind of protagonist. I didn't dislike anything about that with her. I really enjoyed her, but I noticed in the reviews when I went and checked what people thought, like a lot of people didn't like her and thought that she like complained too much and was snotty. I personally think the situation she was put in called for a lot of complaining, but to each their own. I really enjoyed her, but know that if you don't tend to like unlikable protagonists, you're probably not going to enjoy her that much because she's supposed to be that way. But a lot of the things that people pointed out about her in other reviews, like I personally didn't see. It's one of those characters that like, I really like her and I'm not seeing all these flaws. There's also a lot of these mysterious fairy tale creatures woven into this, and I really enjoyed those kinds of characters as well. Again, when you're getting them in these like snippets from the stories, like they're all just really weird, not based on any particular archetype from traditional fairy tales, and I just found them very interesting and compelling as well, because you couldn't, this whole thing about this book is it's very unpredictable. Like you think based on fairy tale retellings and fairy tales that you've read that it's going to follow a certain formula, and it proves time and time again that it's not going to. And so I really enjoyed that and following the characters in that way because they just felt very unpredictable and you never knew which way they're going to turn. Lastly, we talk about the plot. This book is kind of broken up into two parts, and like one half, the first half, is very much like a mystery, whodunit, trying to piece everything together, detective-y type feeling, and then the other half is more of the fairy tales and the eeriness and magicalness. And I think that threw some people off when I was reading reviews as well, that people expected the fairy tales throughout. I didn't go into this book with any expectations, and I recommend that completely. I mean, obviously you're watching a review for it, so you're gonna have a certain amount of expectations, but like I didn't know what to expect, so not getting the magic like straight off the bat didn't bother me at all. But I actually ended up liking both parts of it, both kind of trying to uncover the pieces and figure out all of the little clues that have been left, but also all of the like dark fairy tale stuff. I was reading this on vacation and I really enjoyed it. I found it to be a page turner. I could not put it down, even though it was eerie and it wasn't really the type of, I wasn't in the type of setting in Florida by the pool to be reading like an eerie, creepy fall type read, but I still highly enjoyed it. And like I said, I enjoyed both parts of the plot and I just found it really interesting and I just had to keep reading it. So overall, I ended up enjoying this way more than I thought I was going to. I was really blown away by it, and I think because I went in with zero expectations. I loved the atmosphere, I loved the characters, I loved the unpredictability of it all, and just that kind of unsettlingness to it. So I overall gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. So with that being said, I will be doing a spoilery gush on this book, so I'll leave that linked on the screen if you've read it. You can go ahead and check that out. So comment down below, let me know your thoughts on the Hazel Wood. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!